Okay, let's do this one last time. This intro has probably been used by so many other YouTubers, it's probably just so worn out by this point. So if you don't know, Across the Spiderverse came out and proved to the world that yes, it is possible to make good superhero movies nowadays. Maybe it only works when it's Spider-Man. Moving past that, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse is incredible. It is great. I haven't had this much fun with a movie since I don't know, maybe when the original came out? There are loads I could talk about with this movie, such as the beautiful animation and artwork that came out of this movie, the new and interesting characters, the fact that this movie ends on a cliffhanger. But I feel like all of those things have already been talked about. I would much rather talk about the writing in this movie. Look at my channel. But this movie does something that I think a lot of sequels struggle with, and by doing that, it makes itself one of the best examples on how to make a sequel properly. But it also sets itself up to be a really interesting story. To understand how it does that, first, we need to look at the first movie. The first Spider-Verse movie, aside from just being really good, is the perfect example on how you can use the hero's journey effectively. So, a bit of background. This is Joseph Campbell. And this dude was like a massive nerd in mythology. He studied it a lot, and one day he wrote this book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. This book basically talks about a bunch of myths and how they follow this formula called the hero's journey. Ever since this concept was introduced, the hero's journey has been used, altered, and bended in many different ways. It's basically a stepping stone in terms of early storytelling. And the original Spider-Verse movie falls really well onto this category, or chart. Call to adventure. Miles tries to figure out who he is at this new school in Brooklyn as the son of a cop, as a graffiti artist, etc., etc. You get the idea. Miles tries to figure out who he is. Supernatural aid. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider. Threshold crossing. Spider-Man dies, and the portal opens up, letting all these new spider people run around. Around this point, many helpers and mentors are introduced. Peter B. Parker, Gwen Stacy, Penny Parker, Peter Porker, Nick Cage, you get the idea. Challenges and tribulations, including sneaking into the lab to get the monitor, all the other spider people trying to encourage Miles to become better, the whole fight with the spider people versus Kingpin's villains, meeting Aunt May, yada yada, you get the idea. Abyss. His uncle Aaron is killed, and he is denied to go on the other mission with the other spider people. The helper in this case is Miles' dad, who says some encouraging words about him, and Miles has a revelation about being Spider-Man. Rebirth and transformation. The iconic What's Up Danger sequence, where Miles realizes his potential about being Spider-Man and goes over to fight Kingpin. Atonement. Beating Kingpin in that huge boss battle. And then return to the world by being Spider-Man. What I'm saying here is, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse fits the hero's journey super well, and that's not a bad thing. Not all media needs to fit the hero's journey to tell a story about a protagonist or a story in general. But by using the hero's journey, they create a progressive character arc for Miles, and it works really well. In the beginning of the movie, Miles is basically asking himself, who am I? And by going through the hero's journey, the answer that he gets to is, I'm Spider-Man. Standing alone, it works as a great exploration about finding out who you are through the hero's journey. I would have thought a sequel would have been a bad idea, because it seems like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a pretty unique story that basically is wrapped up in one neat bow. After all, we already got the answer to our main question. Miles knows who he is now. He is Spider-Man. But Across the Spider-Verse does something really cool, because it does something that a lot of sequels don't really tend to do. Another lesser sequel would have done something like have Miles still question who he is even after the movie. And while that isn't necessarily a bad idea, Across the Spider-Verse does something else. It decides to ask, who is Spider-Man? Throughout the movie, it's clear that everyone has their own idea who they are, and how this whole spider persona fits into that is different for everyone. For example, Hobie Brown knows who he is. He's a punk who likes to play the guitar. He's against the British government, etc., etc. You get the idea. So, as a spider persona, he's Spider-Punk. And that's how Spider-Man fits him. For Gwen Stacy, she knows who she is. She's a ballerina. She likes to play guitar. She also has her own ideas about how Spider persona fits into her. AKA, she becomes her own version of Spider-Woman. It's like that for every character in this series. But there are a few things that are consistent with every Spider-Man. One of those things being, Spider-Man is never going to be able to save everyone. Spider-Man has to fail at one point. And for Miles, that's not who he wants to be. He wants to save everyone. And suddenly, how Miles relates to being Spider-Man is different from how everyone else relates to it. And how he relates to it is called into question. Like I said before, in the first movie, Miles asks himself, who is he? And the answer he comes to is Spider-Man. The second movie asks, who is Spider-Man? And the answer we end up getting is a hero who needs to make necessary sacrifices. But the movie also calls into question that Miles was never actually supposed to be Spider-Man. Miguel says he's an anomaly, and we learn that another version of Miles actually becomes the Prowler. These things make us realize how important it is for Spider-Man to be Miles, and how important the Spider persona is to Miles. Because the whole Spider persona is probably why Miles ended up on the right path. So with that, the story also sets up what our question is going to be for the next movie, Beyond the Spider-Verse 2. Instead of who is Miles or who is Spider-Man, it's who is Miles going to be as Spider-Man. And I think based on what we've gotten so far, the answer to that question is probably going to be Miles is going to do his own thing. And that's what makes this movie such a great sequel film, because it expands upon the themes of the last film by asking new questions that bend its original message. This feels like the perfect continuation, but also feels like it can be its own separate and distinct thing. And that's my thoughts on Spider-Verse. I know, there were a lot of things in this movie that I really should have covered, but then again, this movie is 2 hours and 16 minutes long, and it would probably take a month to dissect literally everything in here, but I digress. Anyway, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I hope you stick around to see what I do next time. Bye.